So it's always exciting to start a new project. All the possibilities are open to you, and you have the opportunity to choose the technologies and the approaches that work best for your project. And so these decisions are made, which inform subsequent decisions, and these decisions together coalesce into a strategy. And it's all downhill from there. When we start a Django project, usually one of the first decisions we need to make is regarding our front-end stack. Again, there are numerous technologies, numerous approaches we can take. And that leads to a lot of discussion online, people seeking advice, people giving advice. Now, in these discussions, I often see developers in the same basic dilemma that I was in 4 years ago when I started a new project. I had a new website I was creating that would be mostly static, content-driven pages based on my Django models. Now, this is exactly what Django Templates are so good at, with their rapid development, their convenience, and their tight coupling to Django mechanisms. Now, I also had areas of higher interactivity in my site, with more dynamic behaviors, both in my front-facing side and on my administrative interface. Now, for these, I wanted the power, the node ecosystem, the development experience provided by a full-weight JavaScript framework, something like Vue or React. In short, I wanted the best of both front ends, JavaScript and templates, and the flexibility to be able to use each when and where they're most effective for my project. Now, at the time, I was under the impression that I couldn't have both, at least not without significant compromise. After all, using a build-based JavaScript framework means a REST backend API. And if I were using a REST API, that means we're going to bypass the Django front end, which means no Django templates. On the other hand, if I wanted to stay with Django templates, that means I would get my interactivity from a script-based JavaScript framework, HTMX or Alpine perhaps. And that's because a build-based JavaScript framework just doesn't work well in this multi-page architecture that's required by Django templates. So I had to choose one or the other, give up the other, or so I thought. Well, long story short, I did find a way to combine Django templates and Vue in a way that I felt preserved the best of both front ends. In fact, I was so pleased with my approach that I wrote an article entitled, fittingly enough, Vue plus Django, the best of both front ends. But I still see in many online discussions, many developers that still feel that for all practical purposes, templates and Vue are mutually exclusive. So I'm here today to continue my quest to dispel this myth. Now, also, Vue has changed quite a lot in the 4 years since I wrote my article. The build system has changed from Webpack to Vite. State management system has changed from Vuex to Pinia. And there's a new streamlined composition API for building components. Now, luckily, I feel all these changes make it easier than ever to integrate Vue and Django. So today, I'll present my updated approach, which includes the latest updates to Vue. And, well, this will be a fast introduction, though. I apologize for that. But I will leave you with an updated article that has everything goes into more detail on everything I've discussed today. I also have some resources for you to bootstrap your own project. But before I proceed, it's not my intention to say that this is the best stack for all Django projects. It's not. I believe it is a very good approach, but there are very many good approaches. We heard one just today, earlier in this room. The approach you take depends on your project, your circumstances, your goals. But what I would like you to take from this talk today, if you are looking to combine Vue and Django, there is an effective solution that preserves the strengths of both. Now, I've used this particular approach in production for over 4 years, and it's served me very well. Okay, I'll demonstrate this approach today with a fictitious app. In this fictitious app, a user may spend virtual points to claim one or more rewards presented to them. Now, I've already written both sides of this. I'm sorry I don't have time to interactively code with you. I know how riveting it is to watch people code. But I will go over the code with you. On the Django side, we have a very simple model, application with a model. The reward model has 3 fields: name, description, point value. Point value being how many points it takes to purchase that reward. We have a list view that presents all these rewards to the user, and an associated template, which builds the HTML for that view. Oops, sorry. Here's what that view looks like. You see we loop through all the rewards. We show the name, description, and point value for each. And we have some areas set aside where we want interactivity, namely these buttons here. Now, and we also want these points remaining to be decrementing every time we choose a reward to redeem. So I said we'd be using Vue to inject this interactivity. We'll do so with this Vue application on the right. It will consist of 3 elements: a Penia store. A Penia store is where we encapsulate the business logic and also the shared state for all the components on that page. Then we'll use 2 single file components. These are the basic building blocks of Vue for renderable content. The first will be point status element, which will correspond to this area up top. And reward claim, which will correspond to the buttons here. So these will serve to kick off the redeem logic when clicked. Okay, now let's look at the code. I'll skip most of the Django side, but here's the template that renders that view. You can see up top we have a header element, which contains this section. We show the redeemable points, which comes from our view layer. It's a context variable, but this is static now. It's not going to change. Then we loop through our rewards and show a card for each that includes the name, the point value, and the description. And we have a place set aside here for our button. It will go there. Okay, let's look at the Vue side. Now, as I said, 3 components, the first being the store. Here's the file for the store. The first line, we define the store. Then we have two pieces of state that we'll be tracking. The first will be how many points have been redeemed so far in this session. We'll start with 0. And then which specific rewards have been redeemed. We'll use a dictionary for here. The keys will be the reward ID. The values will be true, false, depending on whether that reward is redeemed. We'll assume that absence from this dictionary means that they are not redeemed. Next, we have 2 actions, redeem and unredeem. Actions in a Penia store are functions that encapsulate business logic. So here in our business logic, if we are redeeming a specific reward ID with a point value, we will simply update our store. Points redeemed is incremented, and in our dictionary of rewards redeemed, we set that specific reward ID to true, indicating that it's redeemed. Unredeemed works very similar, but opposite. We decrement the number of points, and in the dictionary, we set that to false, indicating it is not redeemed. Finally, we have a helper function, is redeemed. We'll use this in our component, and this will return true or false for a given reward ID if it has been redeemed. Okay, now for the 2 components. The first one is point status, and that corresponds, again, to this area up top. Right at the top, we have a prop defined. A prop is Vue's concept of a parameter. So the idea here is that different users will have different points made available to them. So this component needs to know how many points are available so that it can do its calculation to show how many are remaining. Now, typically in a Vue application, you might be using a REST backend to pull this information, but we're not going to be doing that, as I said. So we'll be getting this information from our Vue layer in Django. I'll show you how we do that in a moment. But for now, just keep in mind that this component is parameterized. We'll need to supply this points available for us to use this component. Moving on, we grab a handle to the store, the one we just created, as we'll be using it here in this template. And in the template, we show the points remaining string and a container that shows how many points are remaining. Now, this is a reactive content here. We take the points available, which is the prop, and we subtract the number of points redeemed from our store. That'll show us how many are remaining. Now up here we have a dynamic view binding to a class. We're going to apply a specific class to this element. Specifically, the negative points class will be added if the user has redeemed more points than are available. In other words, if they have gone negative in their balance. The point of showing this is to show you that you can style components here individually. By virtue of being placed on the page, they will automatically get all the styling of your Django page or Django site. But if you want to add additional styles, you can add them here as so. The second component, reward claim. This corresponds to the button, these buttons. This takes two props, so each button will need to know for which reward it's redeeming and how many points that specific reward costs. Again, we'll show you how later we pass that information. Again, we grab a handle to the store because we'll use it in our template. And here on the template, we show one of two buttons. If the user has not yet redeemed the reward, then we show the redeem button. And when clicked, that will trigger the redeem action in our Penia store, our business logic. Otherwise, we will show the unredeem button. And when that was clicked, we will show the do the unredeem action from our store. Okay, so that's it. I told you we need three components, the store and two single file components. We have them. How do we tie these all together now, especially in such a way that we can inject them into our Django template? Well, with Vue, that's done with what's called an entry point. And I'll show you the code here. Okay. Starting at the top, just a little boilerplate. All the components here will be using the Penia store. So we need to instantiate that here at the top. But otherwise, moving on to line 9, we look in our document for an element identified by the ID point status. So if we look again at our Django template here, you'll see up at the top, we have this section here, a header that has this content and it's identified by the ID point status. So that is indeed where we want to inject our Vue component. So we grab a handle to it here. On the next line, we run create app of Vue function. This is Vue's top-level function for inserting a component into your page. The first argument for this needs to be the root component in question. In our case, it's point status. And the second will be the names and values of your prop values, your root component prop values. Now, you can pass these normally in any way you wish, but here I'm using a function that I wrote. It's made available as a function. You can use this in your own projects. I'll focus on what it allows us to do, not the exact code of the function itself. But what this allows us to do is take the data set attributes of the parent element and pass them in as component values to our root component. So in this case, if we go back to our Django template, we can add a data attribute for that root component prop. It was called points available. We'll convert it to kebab case here and pass in a value. Now the value we want is the same as the one that we're showing to the user here. It comes from our template variable, redeemable points. So there's our basic mechanism how we can pass information from the Django Vue layer to our Vue component without having to go through REST. We're using it with data attributes here. Moving on the entry point, we note that this component will use Penia for its state management, and then we physically mount it into that status element that we identified above. That completes the process here. What about reward claim? Well, we can't use an ID for this one because we see it's being repeated several times on the page. IDs have to be unique. So let's look at our template. What can we use as a handle? Going through our loop here in the rewards, we see that we have a reward claim section, a placeholder for our button here identified by the reward claim class. So this is what we'll use as our handle here. And you can see in our entry point, we do a query select all, get all the reward claim elements with all the reward claim, all the elements identified with the reward claim class. And for each of those, we create an app. This time, our root component is create as reward claim. Again, we convert dataset attributes into properties to that. So we can go back to our Django template now and pass those. It required a reward ID. We'll use that from our loop variable, which is a reward model, and the number of points that costs. Okay. Finishing the entry point, we again note that this component will use Penia for state management, and then we physically mount it into that element. Now we have our Vue side completed. We have all the elements that make up our app, and we have an entry point that serves to map that into our Django template. On our Django template side, we have set aside those container elements, and we have passed the needed props. Is there anything left to finish this? Yes, one last thing, we need to import the JavaScript for the entry point in our template. Okay, so now if we go back to our page and reload, we have the dynamic behaviors that we were expecting. You'll see that the buttons switched from the redeemed to unredeemed side, and our point totals are updated as we go along. Now what's cool is that we still get all the benefits of our Vue templates, despite the fact that we're now running this through a Django application. If I bring up the developer toolbar, for example, and bring up the Vue tools, you can see that we can, for example, inspect our state on the page as we modify it. Down here at the bottom. We can even physically manipulate this state through our browser for testing purposes or for observing the effects of state changes. What's better, we still get hot reload from Vue. So if I make a code change to my Vue code, like here, up point remaining, I'll change this to different text, points left. Oops, wrong component. Yeah, here. I'll change this color down here to blue as well. It's immediately updated in our page, no need for a page reload. And it even maintains our state all the while. Okay, one quick detour. You saw that when I coded this source for the JavaScript, I use a local host directory running on a different port. This is a URL to my Vite dev server running on the machine. Vite comes with a dev server, very much like Django's run server, which enables all the debugging functionality, like I just showed you. This is absolutely what you want to use when you're running or developing your code. But in production, you will be expecting bundled, compiled JavaScript files, production assets. So how do we handle that? All we really need to do is ask Vite to output its build files to some place where Django can get to it, which is namely the static directory. So here's my Vite config file. You can see I've set the output directory here to my Django static directory. So if I run a build, a production build, it will output here into my Django static directory. We can then change this URL to a static URL. We can reload the page. It still works. However, we don't have any access to our developer tools anymore because this is now a production build. Of course, it doesn't make sense to have to change our templates every time we switch between production and development. So I personally use a template tag to manage that process for me. Just give it the name of a bundle, and it will build the URL appropriately to the dev server or to static based off of a setting. I've made this available as a library. You can use it on your own projects. And that completes that loop. One thing to note before I go on, though, so still most of this page is written in Django templates. If you wanted to change the structure of the cards or the entire shell of the site, this is still all done in Django templates. And we still get all the benefits of running through Django templates, such as middleware and authentication and so on. All those Django mechanisms are preserved. It's only when we get into interactivity that we move then into Vue. But when we move into Vue, we're writing only in Vue. We can use all the Vue tools that we're comfortable with in the entire Node ecosystem. So Django template stays templates, Vue stays Vue. Okay, so having completed that example, we have the basic roadmap for integration at this point. So first, decide what you want to keep as a Django template, which part of the page is Django template, and which parts you want to become Vue. I personally try to keep as much as possible in the Django templates because of the convenience. Then you code those parts. You can do this independently. You can potentially have a separate team working on each side, using the tools that they're most familiar and comfortable with. It's only then when it comes time to integrate that we need to coordinate a little bit. On the Vue side, we build our entry points And we map, in those entry points, we map our components to the container elements in our template. Now, on the Django side, we create those container elements in our template. We pass any needed props to the Vue components that we're using. And then finally, we import the entry point JavaScripts. You could import multiple entry points per page. How you organize your entry points is up to you. You could do it per component. You could do it per page. You could lump similar components all together in a single entry point. That's all up to you. OK, so I'm sorry that was so quick and very much a crash introduction, but I'll leave you with some additional resources here. First, there's an article, Django, Vue plus Vue, REST not required, which goes into, as I said, a lot more detail about the techniques I described here. It also has a lot more additional techniques, such as additional ways to pass data from Django to Vue. There is examples of how to post back data from the Vue front end to Django, how to have persistent state across page reloads. Normally, if you would reload the page, you'd lose your state, but there are convenient plugins to keep your state persistent across page loads. And finally, some discussion of Vue's teleport capability, which will allow you to move parts of your Vue components to all over your Django template. Very useful when integrating there. There's a cookie cutter project made available. This is a great way to bootstrap your own project using these techniques. It's based off of the standard Django cookie cutter, but includes the Vue integration, and also a very much more in-depth or thorough rewards example than the one that I showed you here. And then finally, a couple libraries that encapsulate some of those helper functions and logic that I described during this talk. All right, thank you very much for your time. Enjoy the rest of DjangoCon. And if you have any questions, please come up and ask me either now or anytime during the conference. Thank you.